I guess there's a special event going, so a really good snack or something like that. So coming up. So I'm going to be quick. Let me see. Actually, in this sermon, there are literally 10 application points. I will not talk about 10. I'll talk about one maybe. But actually, I do have a list of 10 application points. But let me. So what I'll do, I'll go a little faster today. I would just basically tell you what the passages, tell you the principle, and then talk a couple application questions. A couple applications. You're probably thinking, why don't you just do this every week, right? Just to make it faster. But yeah. So today we are looking at Joshua chapter 6. Joshua chapter 6. Those of you who have been following along with us over the past couple months, the Israelites have been going through the desert, and now God has promised to bring them into a promised land, right? He's made a promise to bring them into his land. And so they are wandering through the desert, 40 years in the desert, hot, sandy, dirty, no showers, torturous. No water, torturous. And now they're getting to the edge of this promised land, and they're looking at it, they're seeing this nice, cool, greenish, probably more, it's in the Middle East, right? So it's more green than the desert, more cooler, and I don't know, maybe, I'm not sure how it would compare to here. And they're seeing this promised land, they're about to go into it, and God brings up a leader for them. His name is Joshua. Right? So Joshua's going to take them into this land, but there's a problem. In this land, as they're looking there's a big city with walls, a fortress around it. It's called Jericho. Now, if you grew up in church, you probably heard this story before, but they're looking at Jericho. They don't know, these are people that have wandered 40 years, a generation or two, in the desert. They're not battle trained. They do not have battle rams. They don't have catapults. They're not equipped to take a city, but they are just wanderers in the desert. And so they get to this city. They don't know how they're going to take it, but God has promised that they're going to take the city. They're going to go into this promised land. And so Joshua gets them together, their quote-unquote army, and he gets them together, and then God gives them instructions of what to do. God says that you are to take your army and march around the city. So you're just making a circle around the city. I don't know if in the city they were maybe shot some arrows at them, threw some spears at them while they were going around, I don't know. But they marched around the city. And then the next day they were told to do that again. Just march around the city. And no weapons, no fighting, no taking in the city. And the next day they were told to do it again, right? And the next day they were told to do it again. And they keep on doing it. They do it 6 days, and then on the 7th day, God says, you do it again. This time, go around 7 times. Now, 7 is an important number for God. 7 is an important number for the Bible, and it's a measurement of kind of completeness, of fulfillment. So they march around 7 times on the 7th day, and then they are told to yell and scream and make a lot of noise. So they do that, and then as the story goes, the walls of Jericho crumble down. Now, I don't know if you believe it or not. Some people try to think up some kind of reason why, maybe it's the decibel level or the vibration of the, something, the vocal, so it kind of messed with the, but that's not really the point, right? That's not the point of the story, the point of exactly how God did it. The point of the story is this, that God told them that he was going to deliver them into this promised land. God told them that Jericho was going to be no problem for them, that they're going to go past the city. And then God told them to do certain things. And what he wanted was them to be faithful in doing it. He was going to take care of the rest. The point of the story is that God says that he wants, when he makes a promise, that he wants your obedience. And then he will fulfill his faithfulness. They just had to do whatever he asked them to, even though it might seem kind of crazy, really weird. And he was going to do the work instead. Now, how does that apply to your life? Why does that matter to your life? Because I think when it comes to Christianity, there's a lot of things that you've heard in church, or maybe is what God wants you to do, that is kind of strange, kind of weird. kind of difficult to do. And you need to be encouraged to do that. You need to know, do I have the strength to do what God calls me to do? I'll give you some examples. Again, I did have 10 examples, but I can't obviously give you all 10 in whatever 10 minutes I have left or whatever. So I'm going to give you a couple. Okay. In the Bible, and I think for Christianity, one of the foundational principles of Christianity is that you are to give of your life. Right? You are supposed to be not a consumer, but a contributor. So, for example, when you live in your community, you go to your school should be better off with you in it than without it. Now, it's hard to think, right? You think of school as you go to school, you're going to get something out of it, right? You're going to get a degree, you're going to get good grades, you're going to get whatever, and you're going to get something out of school. But actually, it's the other way around. Your school should be better off with you in it than if you weren't there. So your classes, you should be a blessing to your classes. You should be a blessing to your teachers. You should be a blessing to other students. When you're there, your school, your class, your friendships, your relationships, your presence makes the school and your class a better place. In your family, your presence doesn't cause more problems in your family. It makes your family better. In your relationship with your parents, your relationship with your guardians, your relationship with siblings, if you have any, your relationships with others in your family, your extended family, you are blessed. Your relationship to the community, if you live here in 4S, you live in San Diego, you live wherever you live, your presence there contributes to society, makes the world a better place. You're not in this area using up more air, using up more resources, taking up, even when we talk about, how you impact the homeless, the poor in your area, how you impact the environment, how you impact natural resources. Your presence is better for that than worse for that. So you are a contributor, not a consumer. Another way you can think of this, another speaker said, is to think of this. There are two ways to live life. You can either live your life for mine, or my life for yours. There's no way that it just, if you live in relationship with other people, then it's either your life is given and your life costs things in order that my life is better, or my life costs and is given so that your life can be better. There's two ways you can live. And the way that God chose to live, the way that Jesus came, was that he was going to have everything, but give up everything for you. And so that's a fundamental principle for how Christians are called to live their lives, is that you as a Christian, whether it's a society, whether it's an environment, whether it's your school, whether it's your family, whether it's a relationship, you are giving of your life to make that better. Now, you can understand that principle, right? You can, intellectually understand that principle. But can you do that? Right? Now, I could say to you, well, you just make you feel guilty. Right? God says you should do it, right? But what if I were to say to you that the reason why you do that is because God calls you to that, and as you are faithful in that, God will do his work through you. Just like the Israelites at Jericho, right? And God told them to do something, walk around the city, right? Yell and scream. But God was going to honor their faithfulness. God wanted them to be faithful. And he was going to do the work. What if you were to live your life like that? What if you lived your life for your school, or for your company, or your job, or whatever, and you made it a better place because God called you to? And you let God work. I'll give you another one. Honesty, integrity, not deceiving others. Often there's this kind of debate in middle school, high school, whatever. What is a lie? What is a lie? Is an untruth? Wait, omission? Is that a lie? What about Do you guys like my haircut? Well, you can, lie, white lie, black lie, honest lie, intent lie, you don't want to hurt people's feelings, stuff like, what is the lie? One way you could think of it, the way that Jesus talks in the parable, in the Sermon on the Mount, think about it like this. Jesus says that the way you ought to conduct yourself is that your word should be trusted. When you open your mouth and you say something, people should be able to trust the words you say, which means that you probably, you wouldn't lie. But also that means that even by omitting things, even by being polite to someone, that the words you say, when somebody hears it, they can trust that you are a truthful person. Now, you might say, well, that's kind of difficult to do in some circumstances. It is.
How do you not offend people?
Yeah, it's difficult to do, because you might offend people. But if this story is telling us anything, the story is telling us that God says He wants your faithfulness. He wants you to do things which sometimes seem crazy, which sometimes seem weird, which is like walking around a building or a fortress or a city to bring the walls down. He wants you to do that because He says that you should do that. And then He will do the work. He will do the rest. Right? That's what it means. I'll give you another one. Purity. Purity, I think means different things in our time and our age. With cell phones. I think for some of us, we probably couldn't even go into a mall and walk through a mall without having impure thoughts, just because of the type of advertising, the type of stores, whatever. Some of us have a lot of struggles with purity in kind of how we view ourselves, how we view of our own beauty and image, how we want to portray ourselves. Some of us, cell phones and the internet and privacy and things like that are real issues and challenges for us in purity. But God says that there is a standard for purity, right? And then God says not only in the Ten Commandments, which we briefly looked at a few weeks ago, but also even in the New Testament, when Jesus talks about the Ten Commandments, says that anyone who even looks or thinks lustfully has committed adultery. That's a very high standard. That's a very difficult standard. Who hasn't, right? Who doesn't have that problem? And sometimes we feel like, well, that's just hopeless, right? Why would we even try that? Especially in our world today. But if this passage tells us anything, that God does want you to try. God does want you to be faithful in that. God does want you to work towards purity and holiness, integrity, honesty, generosity. And as you do that, He will be faithful in doing His work and bringing you through. There's obviously so much more I could say on this, but I think that I think you understand the principle, right? The principle is that when God calls you to do something, you're to do it. And your faithfulness in doing that is what God is looking for. And God will bring about His work in your faithfulness. Now you might say, well, how do I know that? It's very theoretical to say that, right? That just be faithful in doing, but how do I know that that God will keep His promise, that God will do those things? And I think we do know that because of what Jesus has done. We see, as much as there was a leader Joshua, who was taking these people into a promised land, there's a leader who came again many years later. This leader, Jesus, which is actually the same name as Joshua, the Lord saves, was going to take His people into a new promised land. And He was going to do that by His sacrifice and by His giving up everything and living in purity and in integrity and honesty. And by living that life that we ought to have lived, and by dying the death that we ought to have died, he was going to be the one who was ultimately faithful to what God has called us to do. And because he is faithful, we can be delivered to a new home. And so, because God brought Jesus and sacrificed Jesus for us, that becomes the reason why we want to live for him. We might have to do things that are crazy, that are weird, that other people think are, it just doesn't make sense. But the reason why we do it is because we know that God will be faithful. He's already been faithful through Jesus Christ. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this story that reminds us of your faithfulness and your call to us to be obedient to you, no matter what it is. And Lord, we pray that as we live our lives, that you would help us to honor you through what we do, to trust that you are working in the ways that you call us to live. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Are we going down?
I finally brought money. I kidnapped him.
Offering first.